Hello and welcome. The US president is considered one of the world's most powerful men, probably the most powerful. So how closely is the world actually following the election? You'd be surprised. International polls suggest there's far more indifference than you might expect in some parts, especially considering how important this vote is and how much it will ultimately affect most other nations, from Mexico to Malaysia. The importance of world opinion is not lost on John McCain and Barack Obama, and both presidential nominees have made trips to Europe over the past year to connect with leaders there. During those visits, both stressed the importance of having strong relations with their European allies, many of whom had expressed low approval of the US leadership. According to a series of recent Gallup polls, the race to the White House is being watched across the world, but to varying degrees. Africa is definitely interested, and Gallup found that 56% of Africans surveyed chose the Democratic candidate Barack Obama, while 9% chose Republican John McCain. This is despite sub-Saharan Africans' relatively high approval of the Bush administration, which generally has a much lower rating in other regions of the world. Countries in Latin America, geographically closer to the US, expressed less interest in the results of the US election, reflecting the feeling that many in Latin America believe it's irrelevant to their lives. Among the 7 South American countries surveyed, most respondents showed indifference when asked who they wanted to see in the White House. Central America and Mexico showed more interest, believing the election will make some difference to them, perhaps due to their proximity to the US border. On this program, we look at international perspectives on America's important vote and ask you to take part with your questions and comments on how you might be affected by either an Obama presidency or a McCain one. Don't forget, you can join us through livestation.com. You simply download some software which allows you to enter the chat room to directly pose your questions and comments as we go out live. Now, my guests today have a good spread of international opinion. From Jeddah in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, I'm joined by Khalid Al-Ma'ina, the editor-in-chief of the Arab News, one of the most widely read English-language newspapers across the Arab world. From Nairobi, I'm joined by Salim Amin, chairman of A24 Media, Africa's first online delivery site for material for journalists, African broadcasters and NGOs from around the continent. It was launched in September this year. Salim's also CEO of CameraPix Limited, a leading content provider to African nations with a remarkable and historic archive. Here in Washington, D.C. with me is Paulo Sotero, the director of the Brazil Institute of the Woodrow Wilson Center. For the last 17 years, Paulo was the Washington correspondent for O Estado de Sao Paulo, a leading Brazilian daily newspaper. I welcome you all to the show and start with Khalid Al-Ma'ina in Jeddah. A few would argue that the legacy of George W. Bush is tied to the Middle East to a large degree. So how interested is the Arab world in who is going to replace him?
Well, I mean, during every election time, the Arabs unfortunately decide who's good for them and who's not good for them. The end result is always the same. It happened with Bush, with Clinton and all. But I think if you try to separate these two, people would look at Mr. Obama as somebody they would, love to do business with for many reasons. Number one, he doesn't have that Bush-like tendency that Mr. McCain has. He is less vociferous. He has not been in an attacking mood. And I think also because of his background, that people would, I think, feel more closer to him than they would be to McCain.
Now, Salim, Africa certainly seems to be interested, especially as this election may be historical in placing a black man in the White House. What interest and support have you gauged among the Africans with whom you've connected and spoken for Barack Obama compared with John McCain?
Well, I think there's obviously an enormous amount of interest, and the fact that Barack Obama has roots in Kenya makes it especially interesting for us in Kenya for this election. The problem is that I think there's a lot of expectation that will come with an Obama victory. I think many Africans feel that their lives will change significantly if Barack Obama is elected the president. I think that's a mislaid conception. I feel the world will benefit from an Obama presidency. The perception of the US will be very different, but I don't think it's really going to change the lives of a lot of Africans. He's going to have a lot of problems to pick up on, but there is an enormous amount of euphoria here in the hope of an Obama victory.
Well, before I get to our first caller, let me also ask Paulo Sotero, good to have you with us here. It seems from all the Gallup polls I've looked at that Latin America is not that interested in what's going on. It's so close relatively, geographically, but not as much interest in what the election's doing.
Well, it's because I think we in Latin America know that, it's not a priority for the United States, has never been, never was. And for instance, in Brazil, we are not worried about that. We like it that way. Brazil is emerging as an important country. And there is, I would say, a lot of sympathy for Senator Obama, especially in Brazil. Have to remember we are the largest African country outside of Africa. That's a very important element. There is, I think, a sense that this is an end of an era, assuming that the polls are right. President Bush is not popular in Brazil or any country of Latin America. He's not popular in the United States. So there is sort of a sense of anticipation. And I think among the better informed parts of society, in Brazil, in Colombia, in Mexico, there is this notion, anticipation about, this country that after going through so much bad news, most of them self-inflicted, is now able to sort of renew itself, to send this message of this capacity to renew itself by elect its first African-American leader if the voters confirm what the polls are saying.
I'll look at the issue of race a little bit more in a moment, but let's see if Bart in New Zealand has something for us. Bart, thanks for joining us. What would you like to ask?
Yes, with there being 30,000 handgun deaths in America and tens of thousands of rapes and these huge domestic problems, child abuse, why don't we ever talk about these issues? Why are we always talking about, it's more dangerous to live in an American city than for these soldiers to be abroad, and we just aren't talking about the real issues in America. Actually,
Paulo, you've been in Washington, D.C. 17 years. It was considered one of the most dangerous cities in America for a while. What's your take on this?
Well, it's an important issue here in Washington, D.C., but I come from Brazil, where São Paulo, Rio are very, very dangerous cities. We have thousands and thousands of homicides on both cities. So, I think that this is not an important issue it was not an important issue in the electoral debate, but it is an issue that people are paying attention and will, I think, be the focus of public policy here, and will continue to be, especially in countries like Brazil.
Khalid Al-Maina, how have Saudis reacted to the rhetoric coming from the presidential candidates from both sides about the oil dependency? Words like putting money into the pockets of the Arabs, to buy our oil, and even occasionally, from the campaign sides or from supporters, expressions like this is terrorist oil that we're buying in, that we need more oil independency.
Well, we have become immune to these kind of remarks, and it's like water on a duck's back, because every election they say the same thing, and after 9/11 we heard remarks that were much more atrocious and acidic than this. So I think we take it with a pinch of salt. We know that these remarks are made to appeal to a certain segment of voters. We know that these are made to play to the fears and to play to the gallery. So I don't think so anybody in his right mind here would be affected. I mean, and we don't care, frankly speaking, about it.
All right, Juliana's on the line from Paris. Go ahead. Thanks to have you. Good to have you back, Juliana.
Thank you very much, Mr. Khan. I really just have like to air my view on what I feel an Obama presidency or a McCain presidency will do to my life. I'm a Kenyan, and what I feel strongly is that an Obama presidency might not just solve African solutions overnight. It just won't happen, but I believe that an Obama presidency will listen, will guide, and will give proposals on how to grow Africa. He will be a solution, not definitely for everybody, but he will engage African leaders in dialogue. Okay. When I look at a McCain presidency, it's a replica of what the Bush administration has been doing: divide and rule, Africans killing one another, war in Africa, Kenyans fighting. We didn't see this for years. A Bush administration provoked it, and I believe strongly that a McCain presidency will just lead to another. What right now they've given birth
Juliana?
to a new baby called the Coalition of Governments.
Juliana, I'm going to put this to Salim, because he's sitting there in Kenya, and I want to know what from what you've seen throughout Africa, and I know you travel a lot, Salim. What's the view? What is the expectation of Africans from an Obama presidency?
Well, as I said earlier, I think it's a huge expectation, but I fear that Obama will be judged by what he does with Africa because of his roots and his background, and I think he will be very careful so as not to be seen to be favoring Africa over the U.S. You brought up the point earlier of the problems that he has at home. One of your callers brought up that point of the problems that he has at home that he has to deal with, and I think he will be judged very harshly if he tries to do too much for Africa, and he has to, it's a very fine balance for him. And also going back to your caller's last point, to Juliana's last point, the Bush administration actually did a lot for Africa. Bush visited Africa an enormous amount, more than most other presidents, and there was an enormous amount of aid that came into Africa. Yes, there were a lot of conflicts, but I think we should stop blaming the Americans for the problems that we caused ourselves. And as a Kenyan, I'm not proud of what happened here in December, but it wasn't an American problem. This was our own internal problem that caused this. And so I don't think Obama, I think he will do a wonderful job. I think he'll do a wonderful job for Africa, and he will be, but he will not pander to leaders in Africa thinking they can take him for a ride. I think he'll be tough talking, and I think he will lay down the law for them to make sure that they get things right.
Paolo, you wanted to add something?
Yes, on what the caller mentioned, I think Latin America offers two examples of contrast. Senator Obama, as president, would be probably more inclusive in the case of Cuba. That's very important for us, that we have to reinsert Cuba in the community. We all in Latin America have been insisting on that. I think President Obama would offer a way more rational to do that and to do away with this policy of isolating Cuba that has not worked. Same about Chavez. I think a President Obama, more than a President McCain, would find ways to deflate Chavez because, as was just said, in Latin America also, especially in Brazil, we don't blame others for our problems. We create our problems. Unfortunately, we do not blame Americans for causing our problems.
Okay, let's squeeze in before we have a break. Alex in Nigeria with a question. Go ahead, Alex.
Yes, Riz, I really appreciate the fact that we are thinking about the elections coming up soon. But my concern really is not about the policies and what we're looking at. My concern is about the elections when it comes up in a week's time. And it has to do with the already existing problems with the different states that are voting. And I'm beginning to see the possibility of these elections. And I just hope that the problems that are being envisaged at the moment will be taken care of by next week when all the people will come out to vote.
Okay.
That's my contribution.
All right.
Thanks a lot. And I wish
Alex,
you all the best.
Thank you very much, Alex. Well, there we've got to take a short break. We're back with more on this discussion in just a few moments.